Thank you, everyone. Before we get into everything, just want to introduce our panelists that we'll be having a chat with. First, we have Kevin Smith. He is founder of Epiphany Content, where he helps leaders and founders find their voice and build influence through online visibility. He is also the founder of Brighton United, a community interest company dedicated to creating a more inclusive and representative business landscape in Brighton and Hove. Then we have Ali Jones, is the co-founder of Coachable, a leadership consultancy that helps fast-growing tech companies build high-trust, high-performance cultures. She's coached and developed senior leaders at organizations including OutSystems, Checkout.com, OVO Energy, and brings experience from both in-house and consultancy roles. And last, we have Mo Kanjanal, is an equity and diversity and inclusion leader with over 20 years experience in technology companies leading large global teams and running global employee engagement programs, and over 5 years experience leading inclusion programs across sectors. She is now founder and director of Edge of Difference. Mo is an author, keynote speaker, non-exec, and mentor. So we got some really great capability and powerhouse people here. The first thing I'd like to do is to talk about, just to set the scene for what is happening in diversity right now. There's a lot of connections with what's happening in sustainability as well. So I thought I'd start off just with something called the Gartner hype cycle. Now, especially being a tech audience, you might notice this. This is used quite often for technology and understanding the hype around it. This has now been applied to ESG, which of course D&I sits underneath. It looks at how things have progressed over time, and particularly with ESG, you can see there is a peak of inflated expectations with all the commitments happening, and then a lot of bad things happening. Budgets being cut. There was the carbon offsets scandal. Now we're in this trough of disillusionment that has come across a bit quicker than we had thought, mainly because of what's happening in the US. I won't mention the T word, but he doesn't want us to mention ESG and DEI. And that has brought down everything to the lowest point of, well, we don't expect very much. What we are going to see going forward is actually something I've been advocating so much for in sustainability. It's going to be integrated. D&I and sustainability will be integrated into all business systems, all areas of every business. And that means smaller, stronger teams, both D&I and sustainability, and standardization of best practices. Now, the EU is doing some of this. There are UK legislation coming forward, but generally, we will see the standardization, which is very much welcomed. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the context and trends and what the progression is, particularly in that trough of disillusionment. Starting with the politics of DEI. I also have some stats at the bottom here that will give you context to what I'm about to say. So let's just talk about, firstly, what happened in 2025. So the US executive orders pushed public bodies to dismantle DEI. Some companies, and I focus on some, followed to stay ahead. It made headlines. The media picked this up a lot, saying, oh, all these companies have dropped DEI, but only 2% of employers have actually cut D&I spending. This also came alongside economic uncertainty, messy tariffs, a talk of a global recession, and that meant non-revenue producing teams, including DEI, faced cuts at Meta, Google, Deloitte, Walmart. Walmart, for example, cut DEI roles, but kept investing in equity-driven programs. Their focus evolved from diversity to fairness for all. They dropped the term DEI and now emphasize belonging and inclusivity. And as expected in the hype cycle that you just saw, DEI is slimming down and being embedded across all business units, just like sustainability is. It's being built in, not bolted on to a team over here. Diversity efforts are evolving and to business issues. So business see both the risks of inaction and the benefits of inclusion. Next, we're also seeing investor shifting sentiment. When money talks, the world moves. They want real impacts, not optics. They're focused on risk and opportunity. DEI isn't dead. They want evidence. They want wider access, safe cultures, fair pay, talent and retention, and psychological safety. Inclusion efforts are expected to cut risks, boost performance and innovation, and improve ESG. Here in the UK Procurement Act has just followed suit. Now, the UK government has the biggest spending purse, so this will it'll have trickle-down effect in every sector through the supply chains. They're shifting criteria from choosing suppliers from the lowest cost to the greatest social impact. So that means businesses now need to show how they widen access for everyone to jobs, supply chains, products, and opportunity. So we're seeing a movement away from superficial DEI. Investment in one-off training, diversity days, and quotas are being dropped or minimized. And whilst these things are helpful to unrepresented groups, and I must emphasize that they are very helpful, they don't tackle the root causes or the systemic change of that underrepresentation. So what we're seeing is embedding fairness. Standalone DEI and sustainability plans are being built in, as I said, into HR, marketing, sales, IT, products and services, and leadership. The concept of fairness is being hardwired into policies and practices across the business and stakeholder groups. This lets diversity happen naturally. And as I like to say, I think diversity should be an impact of fairness. Strong D&I still matters. Decades after evidence show it boosts talents, resilience, innovation, and market share. So lastly, what has this all led to? What we're seeing now is companies, leading organizations are now know that inclusive cultures drive results. These cultures challenge the status quo constantly. They embrace change, and teams learn through trial and error. So they're really shaped intentionally. They're to ensure everyone is felt belonged at work. They're curating these inclusive cultures. So leaders are held accountable. Inclusivity is tied to KPIs, and decisions are made by shaping diverse teams. Workplaces are becoming more flexible, fair, hybrid working, pay transparency, and bias-free hiring. Inclusion today means action, not just PR or policies. Innovation depends on inclusive and evolving cultures, and that takes active curation, not one-off initiatives. So that I just wanted to share with you to set the scene of some of the things we're going to talk about. And so now we'll move on to our panel discussion. So I wanted to start off, technology, there we go. I wanted to start off with Mo, if I may. Let me come join you. So I wanted to ask, why does equity and diversity and inclusion play such an important role in tech and creative companies still today?
Yeah, so when we talk, this question gets talked about a lot because in challenging business times, leaders struggle to prioritize things. But if you're a creative or a technology company, so you're creating things that you want to solve world problems, reach lots of people, like drive change, but you only include certain people in your teams, then you're only going to create things that address certain people. And so that's why there's such a strong business case for why you need to include different types of people in your team. So, for example, I've worked with lots of healthcare tech companies. If you're creating healthcare technology that is going to be used by everybody, then if you're not including the ideas and perspectives of different people, then you're creating something that actually only appeals to certain people. There's a lot of data around how that's happened. So a lot of medication is actually only tested on men by default and women by exception, for example. Things like crash test dummies for cars are based on men. Lots of the data that we see around menopause is actually not based on women of colour. It's all based around white women's perspectives. And those are just some of the examples that show you why, if you're going to create things to address problems, you really need to include different people, different perspectives and different ideas, as well as it being the right thing to do. Like, why should we only have certain people in particular roles? So there's so much data and evidence around this. And just a point about why it matters to perhaps some people that are leading businesses. Everyone cares about profits and ideas and profitability and productivity and whether you can recruit and retain people. And actually, it's so important for that too.
Yeah, definitely. That's the increase of market share we were talking about. Your products and services will always be widened when you're more diverse in your thinking, so your products and services evolve. I still remember my iPhone still picks me up as one of my black friends who's a woman and says, all these pictures are you. And I'm like, well, come on now.
And the passport photo algorithm, yes. I don't know if you've ever tried to get a passport recently. If you have darker skin, it keeps saying it's incorrect, for example.
Ali, I wanted to also ask you, how do inclusive leadership behaviors directly influence innovation, team performance, and engagement?
I think it's a great question. And if we think about the landscape that we operate in tech and the decisions that we're having to make and making them at pace, actually, we need teams that feel safe to make those decisions. We need teams that feel safe to take risks, to innovate, to try new things. And from a leadership perspective, and excuse the language, but shit rolls downhill. And your culture is reflective of the behaviors that your leaders demonstrate, not the values that they say are important to them as an organization. So when I'm working with the leadership teams, it's not about the big things. It's about the everyday things. It's about how do you show up in meetings? How do you communicate with your team? How are decisions made? And I think decisions is probably one of the biggest challenges that we see. And I don't know how many of the audience are familiar with Bezos's type 1, type 2 decision making, but around type 1s being sort of that one-way door, type 2 being actually we can make a decision and we can roll it back. But there's so many bottlenecks that we see through product development and trying to get things to market. So creating the space where people can make decisions more autonomously, removing some of those bottlenecks and to move at the pace we need to, so important.
Absolutely. And that actually brings us to a good point about communication. And Kevin, I wanted to ask, how does the internal communication culture bridge the critical gap between a company's external diversity promise and the lived experiences of employees?
Communication and connection, that's how people establish a sense of belonging. When your messaging attracts talent, it's because they think, okay, there's an alignment here in terms of values or the vision for this company. And the next step is to practice what you preach. It's to solidify that both through the onboarding process, making people feel held like they're in the right place, and then reinforcing the message that attracted them by making sure to abide by those same principles in your internal communications. And so that means your Slack channels or making space for people at meetings and facilitating meetings in a way that doesn't just encourage it, but it also mandates that everyone contributes equitably. That's how you facilitate a culture that's congruent with the messaging. It's so nice to have a DEI policy and to have this front-facing message that says this is what we stand for, but the best advocates for what you truly are the people who work internally. And when you equip them with the ability to communicate, an understanding of how to share their stories and their messaging, not just internally, but on social media in such a way that it then resonates with other people who say, that person works for that company, and that company practices what it preaches because their employees are advocates. That's the ultimate goal, and that's the reason why communication is key, and it's just something that can't be glossed over.
Thank you. And it reminds me that it's not just about communication, but it's about leaders listening, taking that information in, not just listening and just, oh, I've listened to them, and making business decisions in line with them, setting goals in your business, and then reporting back what's worked and what hasn't. Also, I wanted to ask you, Mo, beyond surveys, how can employees show they are genuinely listening and acting on employee feedback?
Employee surveys. So we work with a lot of companies, again, where, yes, they have employee surveys, and this data is gathered every year, and then people are asked to fill in the same kind of information again without anything have actually happened during that previous year. So with employee, if you're asking your employees to give time to give you their feedback, then the least you can do is listen and act on it. And you may not be able to do everything everyone wants. Everybody always wants to be paid more money, right? But that's not always going to be possible. But what things can you do to show employees that you care and that you're listening and that you're creating that environment where they can actually thrive? So a lot of the time, it can be quite simple things. It could be straightforward things that show an employee that you actually care and that you're listening. And you referenced a lot of the stats earlier on when you were talking about companies that and what's been happening in the US. I mean, imagine what it's like being an employee in one of those companies that was so quick to cancel the work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Imagine what that felt like if you were one of those employees. And I think people have memories of that kind of thing. Like, you're not going to go and work for a company that was so quick to cancel the work, even if they suddenly turn things around. And actually, I think the companies that have realized that this isn't just about policies and some kind of latest trend, actually this is about the future of organizations, those are the places people want to work. And we hear a lot about companies struggling to recruit and retain. Well, if you want to recruit and retain people, listen to what people are saying, like make it an environment that people want to work and thrive and contribute.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Ali, I wanted to ask, how do you help leaders become more aware of the gap between their inclusive intentions and the impact of their behaviors?
I think the intention and impact piece is so important because, I mean, just look around at the number of people that are stood here because we actually care and want to ensure that nobody's looking around, by the way.
Look at the diverse group right here. I know.
But we want to ensure that our workplaces are places where people can thrive, and we judge ourselves by those positive intentions. I'm afraid everybody else is judging you by the impact that you're having. And that gap between the two is what I describe as the awareness gap. And every single one of us in this room, in this entire hall, have one of those. And it's about how do you raise your awareness of that and actually recognize the impact that you're having on others. So engagement surveys can help give a bit of a pulse check about, from an organizational perspective, about what's going on. But 360 feedback, it's also about, again, in the micro moments. So in one-to-ones, if anybody's asked the question, have you got any feedback for me? And you kind of get that, no, everything's fine. Just shifting the questions ever so slightly to what one thing can I do to make these conversations more effective for you? All of a sudden, you're going to start getting a little bit more feedback. And it comes back to the points that have already been made about listening to feedback when it comes through. Because if we're getting no feedback whatsoever, that is probably an indicator that people don't feel psychologically safe to share it. And actually, it's about demonstrating vulnerability, particularly from a leadership perspective. None of us are perfect. Every single one of us as a leader does things that have some kind of negative impact from time to time, and about owning that. But we all play a role in it, and it's, 360 feedback's great, coaching's great, but the best thing you can do is ask for it, listen for it, do something about it.
Thank you. I remember in 2020, the normal playbook of how companies would react to something happening like a protest just was thrown out after Black Lives Matter because it just wasn't sufficient for a business leader to say, oh yes, we stand by our black colleagues and then carry on with business as usual. It was not being stood for. And then the Me Too movement just before that was fuel for it. So we really need to listen and take action. And you can't just communicate these things without, with intention, without actually saying, no, this is how we're going to make change. Kevin, so let's talk about the practical things that we can do. Especially in these challenging times that we're in right now, especially with D&I and sustainability. Communication dynamics in the workplace are often overlooked, particularly in meetings. How can we ensure every voice is being heard, truly and fairly heard in our organizations?
I think the first thing that we have to ask ourselves, do we genuinely believe that diversity equals productivity? Does it equal higher returns? And the data consistently shows that companies who have more women in management positions, they exceed their revenue targets, and the same for cultural or racial diversity. Teams at the top quarter, they make more money. So then when we take that into meetings and into boardrooms, if we understand that it's more profitable to have more diversity within the company and to retain diverse talent, they need to see other people like them in management positions who have been empowered, then it should be a no-brainer that we are not using subjective tactics to run meetings. We should quantify how much time every person is allocated in a meeting. There's software, there's tools to do so, and it shouldn't be something that's negotiable. And people running meetings, leaders, it should be a non-negotiable that they have facilitation training. So I've founded this community interest company. And as the founder, it's my job to have the vision, like we know what we want to achieve and impact. So we put out messaging that attracts people who want to be on board with that vision. Once they're on board, my job is to listen to them in terms of how we operate and go about that. So my job isn't to come in and to put them under my thumb and tell them this is how it's going to be, or to have 2 or 3 people who take 80 or 90% of the space in every meeting. The job is to empower each and every individual who resonated with those values and with that message, and make sure that we are integrating their innovative solutions in how we proceed about achieving our goals.
Oh, yes, please.
I was just going to say there's some, I don't know how recent this data is, but there was some research done by, I think, Zoom, which showed that actually women get interrupted 50% of the time in meetings.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. And it goes up even higher for video meetings. Like it's even harder to kind of get heard. So yeah, absolutely, there needs to be training on how to make sure people actually get to speak in meetings.
Yeah.
Actually, we're all really passionate about speaking. Funny that when we're all on stage. But just some really sort of practical quick wins that you can do. Encouraging people to do some pre-reading ahead of a meeting. Getting people, if it's about sort of ideating, to share some of their ideas or concepts before that meeting actually happens, can be really helpful for those of us that are reflectors and like to think about things a little bit more. And a great book, Nancy Klein's Time to Think. If you want to go and spend 12 quid, it'll be the best £12 you spend to improve your meetings.
I'd also add to that just to say, leaders, before meetings, before you do this sort of innovation sessions or anything like that, engage with your team one-on-one to see who doesn't like speaking up, who needs another conduit to get their ideas heard, or how can you bring it to the forefront. Ask each individual what are their needs and what are their barriers, and then you get the best out of them. Use that information. Your team innovates. You're selling more products and services. This is all gold that sits in your team. Don't just let 1 or 2 people speak up.
Can I just add, well, we've all got a lot to say on meetings, haven't we? The other thing is why does everything have to be done in a meeting?
There you go.
Because actually, there's too much calling people in, loads of people into a meeting all the time, and actually there's much better ways and more inclusive ways. And some people will never tell you what they think in a meeting. They could have the $1 million idea, but they're never going to tell you in a meeting.
And to that effect, my community interest company, we're having an event in a couple of weeks. And the focus of that event will be a workshop. And the workshop is all about collaboration and culture. And what we're going to achieve is to bring people together in small groups who can then have the safe space to communicate what I need to collaborate effectively. And different people from different backgrounds are going to have different things that suit them, just like Mo said. And when we make space for people to communicate that, we are proactively establishing a workshop for the sake of collaborating for people from different cultures, because different people are different. And so that's something to maybe consider. For us, it's the culture wheel that we're using, but there are other tools where you can get people together who can say exactly, this is what I need to be productive and to contribute meaningfully.
I think that's really important, and particularly in small teams where, especially in tech, where things move so quickly. One person might do some research, and they need to bring that to the rest of the team so that something is changing in the business. So every voice has to be heard because everyone is more vital, I think, in a small company. I'm going to ask some questions of the audience in a sec. So I'm just going to ask one more question. So do prepare your questions. But let's talk about, again, in these tough times, what is the impact of dropping some of this work? And how can employers show people that this is still a priority? Everyone can chip in.
Okay. As I referenced earlier, if you're an employee in an organization and your company publicly says they're dropping work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, then the company needs to think about what they're saying to people. They're basically saying people don't matter if that's the case. So I think in terms of companies that want to recruit and retain people, these are the things you've got to think about. Like, do you actually care about your people? How important are they to an organization? So the impact's huge. Sadly, in tough times, it's often the thing that drops. And so it's down to leaders to really think about what they're prioritizing, because a leader alone, so if we take the example of a tech company, maybe a scaling tech company, a leader isn't going to be able to do everything on their own. They're going to need a strong team, a strong, diverse team that can really deliver and work with them. So I think dropping the work is just the worst thing you can do, because you need to show people that you care, but you also need those different voices and ideas in really tough times. You need people to say, well, what about trying this? Yeah. I've experienced this. What about that? You really need that in an organization.
We're saying exactly the same thing with sustainability, environmental, and social. And this is what we're seeing with that standardization of work. Everything will be that if it's more embedded into all business processes, you don't need big sustainability or D&I teams. You need someone to coordinate it and lead it and bring that information in. But it should be integrated into everyone's work. So even in tough times where everyone is still taking action on these things, because it is risk and opportunity to business. Go ahead.
To build on all of this, there's some, and it was on one of the slides at the start, and it always surprises me, 89% of business leaders describe having a psychologically safe workplace as important. Who are the 11% is what I want to know. But the reality is that less than half of us actually feel psychologically safe at work. And you only have to look at some of the external factors. There was tons of research around the impact of COVID, but everything else that's going on, I suspect today that number is lower than it was 5 years ago, and they last did that piece of research. But then we only have to look at what are the biggest differentiators that sit in teams that perform significantly higher than their peers. It comes back down to psychological safety. And if we want to be able to innovate and to move faster, then people need to feel safe to challenge, to give feedback. But I'm only going to do that if I feel safe to even contribute in meetings. And I'm only going to feel safe to contribute if I feel like I'm included and I have a sense of belonging. So I think sometimes we can run straight to the gate of this is where I want to get to. I want to be an 8 or 9 or a 10. But sometimes it's just about taking the step back and saying, where's the groundwork that we've put in? And I quite often use the analogy that if you're building a house, you don't start building the house with the roof and the windows. Actually, you need to do some kind of digging out the footing, which is, I think, we've got going on at home fairly soon. But for me, it's always a useful reminder that it's about pausing, taking a step back before you move forward.
And I would just also add, everyone is going through their own things in their personal life, and that changes on a daily basis. We've seen that with Rachel Reeves recently. Who cares why she was crying? Let's just understand that we are all different, and we are going through different things at different points. So as leaders of our organizations, we should really respect that and understand and try to give people space. We don't need to know the whys. We just need to be able to accommodate our humanness at work. I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions that that you want to ask the panelists, and I'll bring the mic to you. Yep.
Hello. Jeez. I know. There is a lot of stuff here today that is talking about AI. We know that AI learns from what's been put into it. And we also know that there are some communities and some experiences that are less likely to trust it enough to put into it. So I'd just love to hear a little bit of the thoughts on that.
Yeah. Oh yes, definitely. So AI models, if they're only built by certain people, then that's the result we're going to get. So I know a lot of people are scared to put data into AI. I'm not one of those people. I'm always an early adopter of tech, but that's because I had a career in tech. But I think if we don't participate in this world of AI, it's going to happen anyway. And what do we want to happen? Do we want to be part of this world or not? So I think we have a responsibility to actually make sure we are getting engaged in the subject and contributing to it. I gave that example of the passport photo algorithm, for example. What's going on there? Who's involved in developing that algorithm? How much testing are they doing on different types of people? Because if we don't get involved, we all want to have passports. Well, I do anyway. So we need to, I think we really have a responsibility to get involved and actually contribute to the discussion and what's going on and try these tools out. But I do understand a lot of people are really scared and reluctant to do so. The other thing I often say to people is AI is happening. You're already part of it. It's happening already, whether you're aware of how much it's going on or not. But so many things we use have been using AI for so long. It's not the last 18 months. It's been for such a long time that we really need to get engaged and involved in it.
I'm noticing a frightening chasm with people who use AI and communities who aren't able to access it. And that, for me, is the most concerning element because of the productivity that's associated with being able to leverage those technologies. And marginalized communities aren't able to access this technology. And that's, for me, is the area of the most grave concern, because when it comes to being an asset in a company or being able to market yourself, when you aren't able to leverage the same technologies that adjacent communities are because you've come from somewhere that just has fewer resources, then that makes it that much more difficult to bridge the gap between the haves and the have-not communities.
Thank you, guys. We have time for one more quick one. Sure.
Hiya, thanks so much. So my question was to do with intention and impact. Can you hear me okay? So my question was to do with intention and impact. So I think a lot of us, or at least a question that come up a lot, is how do leaders think differently when it comes to inclusion? So that shift in our mindset. So what is the one thing? We all want to be more inclusive, and we're battling with profits and resources and revenue, but in terms of the impact on others, how can we be thinking differently in order to actually have that impact of an inclusive and safe culture?
Such an important question. And actually, I think you used the word, which is my answer, which is think, and actually having time to pause and to think. So often we're just running on repeat, and we've got behaviors that, have served us okay, particularly, if you've got somebody in a senior leadership role, their behaviors have served them quite well to get to that point in their career. But actually around sort of something I describe as self-management, which is almost like a three-pronged approach. So my level of self-awareness, I don't want to bring more stats into the conversation. Most of us think that we're very self-aware. The reality is that almost all of us are not. So how can I improve my level of self-awareness? How can I build in time for self-reflection? And that's, for me, where that time to think is. So really simple things. Before a meeting, what's the one outcome that I need from this conversation? Or what's the outcome the other person needs? How do I need to show up so that I'm able to best influence that as the outcome? Taking time afterwards just to self-reflect about how close I was to the mark. And then the final prong, and usually the hardest, is that piece around self-regulation. And it hasn't come up in the conversation, but around conscious and unconscious biases, but about how do you make that decision in the moment to demonstrate the behaviors that you need to demonstrate to get the output that you're looking for. So for me, the biggest thing a leader, and in fact, any of us can do, it's not just about leadership, but is to pause, to reflect, and to be more intentional with how we show up rather than just running on autopilot.
Yeah, and this is a subject we could talk about for ages. It's a really great question. And I was going to say, one of the things I often do when I'm working with leadership teams is to say, who's not there when you're making these decisions? Who have you forgotten about? And like really being conscious and thinking about who that is, because a lot of the time things are moving quickly and people are making decisions and forgetting about crucial voices that need to be part of the conversation.
I'm just going to end with one little.
All right, there's this guy, Scott Galloway. I don't know if you've heard of Scott Galloway. He's this American, opinionated, successful, quite brash, and yeah, love him or hate him, you know, like he's quite brilliant. Watch some of his videos on YouTube, and he will oftentimes self-diagnose, and he'll say, okay, you know, I said that because I'm a narcissist or a bit of a sociopath or something. And that is incredibly interesting that someone who's so successful has done the work to investigate their own ego. Now, he's aware that, you know, he can't just like stop being a narcissist, but he's aware of when those traits manifest. And so I think maybe putting in the work to analyze your own ego and to be very clear about your shortcomings and how they manifest in a lack of cohesion with your teams. That's one of the primary things that you can do. And Scott Galloway, for me, is an excellent example of someone who's clearly done the work because they understand the ultimate goal is success and that certain personality traits that we all exhibit are going to keep us from achieving those results.
I've seen his videos. I highly recommend them. So just want to end on a few thoughts. You talking about who's in the room when you're designing products and services. I used to work in real estate, and we'd always wonder, why are women's washrooms the same size as men's washrooms? And there's always a queue, right? We have to take in consideration that there are other things happening than just going to the washroom that is needed. And so why are they not doubled in size for cubicles? Gets my goat every time. But just to wrap up, things to talk about. That we talked about today, embedding fairness in your organization, the evolution from diversity to fairness, widen access and opportunity to jobs, growth, and opportunity for all, not just with your employees, but with your supply chains and communities as well. Leading organizations are curating inclusive cultures. Don't just leave it to chance. Take action and strategic action. And workplaces are becoming more equitable, hybrid models, pay transparency and whatnot. And the future of D&I is about culture and not slogans or performative action. Take real action and feedback to your teams. What works, what hasn't. Ask them questions. And I think the common theme also is listen and take action. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.